I think how some of Nick Land's, trans fans would like to perceive it. And he famously has some trans, sort of admirers.
Yeah, I've gotten to know Nick Land later than everyone else, and not through like primary source. A lot of YouTube discussions talking about him, and at least one talking to him, so that was good. But yeah, I think he's a very interesting, like pro-capitalism figure, but who is not coming at it from this kind of vaguely Christian informed kind of small man liberal democratic American tradition. He has this kind of an anti-humanist bent to it that is almost giddy about seeing humanity transcended. And the capitalism I'm familiar with is just kind of hunky-dory, down to earth, small businessy. So yeah, I don't know a lot about him, but I've been exploring it in the CCRU and all that. Do you know about that stuff? Alexander, you want to chime in on that, Nick Land?
I'm honestly, embarrassingly, not super familiar with Nick Land's work. It's just always seemed somewhat impenetrable, and so I've shied away from getting into it. One of these days, I'm going to actually order a copy of Fang Numina, but yeah, I don't have a lot to say about it because I'm just somewhat ignorant.
Well, I believe, and maybe Hugulian correct me if I'm wrong here, but he kind of has this view of capitalism as this force of its own, which is not unusual, of course, but it has a kind of trajectory and telos and life of its own, which is essentially kind of inhuman, and it will give us unbelievable growth, but will basically render us fairly insubstantial in important ways. And that's not a take on capitalism that I'd ever heard. But yeah, or until recently, that is. So yeah, that's Nick Land, and I know that Mark Fisher, who's better known, although they're both fairly small figures in the grand scheme of things. I don't know how true that is. Mark Fisher's the cooler guy, I guess, because he was involved in music, and that, truth be told, is part of his appeal to me because I come out of the music scene. But it is kind of odd if I'm stepping out of myself for a second for politics to be so wedded to someone's musical preferences. I don't think that's wise. Speaking of wisdom, but
yeah, with Nick Land, in some of his writings he talks about techno capital. I mean, I have Fang Numina in an ebook form. I haven't read all of it. I mean, it's quite a weird book, and it's said to have been written under the influence of all sorts of narcotics, mostly speed, I think.
Yeah, he has a continental philosophical way of defending capitalism, which is itself kind of odd. It tends to be, kind of analytical Anglo-American defenses, super economist from the inside. But yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I like some of the pieces in Fang Numina. There's one called Machinic Desire, I think it's called. And it's very Deleuzian, I suppose. I think it takes a lot of inspiration from the Capitalism and Schizophrenia, especially the first one, the Anti-Oedipus. And yeah, it's pretty interesting, and it's got some spectacular prose, I would say. It's real cyberpunk stuff. And the more recent Nick Land, though, seems to be, he seems to be more Anglo. Basically, he's come back to his Anglo roots, I guess. And he sometimes refers to his early stuff as sort of fans of his early stuff as mentally ill. Like, but I kind of I like it. I find there's something a bit sinister about it, you might say. Yeah, there's this kind of welcoming of the inhuman and the sort of dehumanizing impact of techno capital, as he calls it. It's kind of, you could say it's kind of nihilistic, or it's a kind of accelerationist viewpoint, right? Which is now so popular. But there is a kind of romance or a kind of glamour to his early writing, especially, I think. And I'm all in favor of that. I think there's too much writing now which is kind of drab and doesn't really excite the imagination. But so yeah, I would, if anyone's umming and ahhing about getting a copy of this book, get a copy somehow, and and check it out because I think it's got a lot of great writing in it. You
I
don't
had
have to agree. Yeah,
I had the opportunity to pick it up at a Pasadena bookstore, which is going to close, unfortunately. It's shocking, right? For a while there, independent bookstores that had the last laugh, maybe apart from Barnes and Noble, because most of those had closed. And but now some of the smaller bookstores are starting to go away too. In any case, yeah, I had the opportunity to pick that up, but it was kind of expensive. And my friend, my former friend Rachel Haywire had a copy she used to carry around with her. But yeah,
right. I know Rachel a bit. Yeah, just from online. That's all we've chatted a bit. But all right. I don't know about any other things. Anything more I want to say about Nick Land? But anyway, I think he's an interesting character, and he continues to be interesting, even if I know I don't find his current prose so fascinating. Maybe.
Okay, so he is still alive. I actually just kind of wondering about that because I think the last time I heard an interview with Justin Murphy, and
right.
that was in 2019, and so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, last
Oh,
I
go
heard
ahead.
he was living in Shanghai. Yeah.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, he kind of I don't know, went into radio silence essentially, and there were lots of sort of speculation about whether he got the coof and died. Yeah. So, but in fact, he was quite well, and he returned. But he was offline for quite a while. I think almost a year or more. But yeah, he's still a pretty significant sort of figure, I suppose, on the sort of fringes, influential figure.
Yeah, Nick Land. I'm so used to the consumer is king. All capitalism is directed by shifting consumer preferences. I'm so used to coming out of that kind of take on market processes and all that. This his viewpoint that posits this kind of agency and force on its own in a way that even the idea of the invisible hand doesn't really capture was pretty new to me. I think he'd probably concede, consumers are idiots. Consumers don't know anything. They're not king. And I actually think that kind of, I'm not trying to put some kind of incendiary words like that into his mouth exactly, but I see a kind of drift among the kind of tech right in this kind of misanthropic direction. And they're starting to become huge fans of capitalism because it's basically the sanctuary for the best and brightest in humanity, and we should allow them to just get on to get on. And frankly, as capitalism progresses, consumers can't possibly know what they want because tech is a big, complicated mystery box, and there's just no hope of them knowing. This is not the 1920s. These are not, Sears catalog stuff we're dealing with. So I think that it's no coincidence that kind of great man theory and the increasing complexity of capitalism are occurring at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I think there's this misunderstanding that the people in tech really know what they're doing either. What's interesting, you brought up the misanthropic component of these techno-accelerationists. I feel that the same way, that there's a very deep anti-human sentiment involved, especially if you look at the writings of the EAC people. Go look at like some of Beth Bezos's articles on what EAC is actually about and what they say, and they're pretty clear about it. They say, we don't actually care about humanity. We don't actually care about human beings at all. We don't care about human consciousness even continuing. All we care about is giving life to this machine consciousness that we think is meant to surpass us. And in some ways, it's kind of a doomsday cult. But a note on sort of this interesting thing about consumer-driven versus, when you first started on that point about economics, I was thinking it's sort of a reminiscent of the old like consumer versus supply side debate. But
yeah,
it's not really the traditional conception of the supply side in like, oh, you have these valiant entrepreneurs who are out there creating new things, and the Steve Jobs sort of people don't know what they want until we give it to them kind of attitude. It's more it's actually weirdly more passive than that, because the strain of thought that's captured today's techno optimists is that actually they want to become more and more integrated into a process that again, yeah, has agency outside of them, and their goal is to become merged with this machine or capital intelligence process, and to become a seamless component of it, and to give all of their energies towards it to an end that is not even their own. And so in some ways, it's almost anti-agentic.
Yeah, for the longest time, we were told that the essence of anti-capitalism was bureaucracy and being reduced to a number, and that capitalism was the realm of taking individuals seriously and their dreams and desires. And yet the new kind of techno-capitalism seems to go quite well with bigness in organization, monopoly. And as you say, yeah, they're almost excited to see just what that kind of massive aggregation of resources held in the hands of a few corporations and in the heads of a few brilliant individuals can do,
Well, not only that, but they worship literally the processes themselves. I mean, they're worshiping capital, they're worshiping machines.
Right.
They view themselves as servants of that. Not even loyal. It's not like they're corporate guys. A lot of these people have worked at large corporations and then spun off startups of their own. It's that they view themselves as servants to this machine intelligence that they want to give rise to. And so, yeah, I'm not going to pull any punches. I do believe it's a doomsday cult.
It's oddly brought some of the value of the old, communist versus capitalist debates around central planning. It's sort of revived communist central planning to some degree. There's that writer, Nicholas Villarreal, who's written for Palladium, talking about how basically these trends in capitalism might bring new force and possibility to central planning. Of course, he would like to do something social democratic with that. And I'm starting to realize that I'm saying social democratic basically to just say that it isn't actually communist, but I don't know how much is really democratic. I mean, the entire democratic world is getting away increasingly from actual anything like hands-on democracy. Actually, no, I want to scratch that completely because of the kind of populist thing we've seen unfold too. So I'd have to rethink that. I overreached with that one.
Maybe I could come in here. I think when you're talking about communism and central planning, I mean, there are certain trends with things like, climate change, sort of mitigation measures, which do to some extent resemble communism. You could say things like UBI as well. If we're going to sort of end up with large numbers of, large percentages of the population basically unemployed and unemployable, that UBI might have to be brought in for that. So these are things which, really require central planning. I think that it's not something that the market can really solve. And people have mixed feelings about that, right? Some people are all in favor of these kind of measures, centrally planned economic measures, and some people find them quite alarming and dystopian. A lot of it, I think, it depends on who is doing the planning, really, and how sort of lucid those people are. And I think the problem we have is that the people are not very, the elites, the people in charge, are not very lucid at all, and they don't really know what they're doing. I mean, you can see that with the net zero project in Britain, which most people with their heads screwed on can see that this is a kind of car crash in progress, really. That it has the potential to just destroy the British economy the way it's being sort of enacted. So, I mean, I do think climate change is a real thing. I think I've said that before on this channel.
Yeah.
And it does require some kind of action and coordinated action for sure. But I think it doesn't mean throwing farmers under the bus or throwing small businessmen who need to to get around London, let's say, without paying exorbitant sort of fees, not throwing them under the bus, which is what is happening, I think, at the moment. With Sadiq Khan's ULEZs, the ultra low emission zones in London. All kinds of regulations about vehicles. What level of pollution is allowed. It's pretty strict. And also those regulations kind of changing quite often. Yeah. So 1 year, let's say a small business has, I don't know, a few white vans, which typically, the famous white van man, right? Is a plumber or painter and decorator or somebody like that.
Or
and sorry.
I mean, just the unmarked white van. Well, you didn't say unmarked. Never mind.
Oh, no. But it's kind of like in Britain is we sort of, everybody associates these kind of small businessmen, these tradesmen really, with white vans. And in the past, it's funny, but this white van man was a kind of maligned figure in a way, because people saw him as somebody who was a road hog. Yeah, was always kind of rushing off to the next job and was going to cut you up on the road, right? But I think a lot of people have sympathy with White Van Man because he's kind of getting, as I say, thrown under the bus by Sadiq Khan, and probably Labour, in the future Labour government, which is very likely, it seems, at this point. It's a real, I think, a travesty. These people are vital to the British economy, really. We don't want everything to be run by corporations or the state.
Yeah, it's been difficult trying to, when I've talked to some progressive friends, for them to kind of buy the idea of green austerity. When you have these mandates, they think of austerity as basically some kind of right-wing budget crunching thing, and then environmentalism as a positive thing. But the idea of denying resources to people, actually, taking things away from them by mandating it for environmental reasons, that doesn't seem like a form of austerity to them, because it's not coming directly from the employer or something, or from a conservative government exclusively.
This is the whole sort of degrowth agenda, yeah. Which you're talking about misanthropic attitudes, in the tech right, but I think there's equally misanthropic attitudes in the sort of lefty green, on the lefty green sort of side of the spectrum, where people are seen almost as a kind of sort of imposition on the planet. Right? What are you doing on this planet? You horrible polluting, human beings, right? Or humans. They always like to use the word humans, which I find kind of irritating. Human beings, I think, is a bit more dignified. But I think misanthropic, misanthropy generally is a real problem in the culture today. I think it's partly driven by social media, which does expose us to so many appalling, kind of behaviors, right? And doesn't really show us much that is positive. It is, I think, driving some kind of misanthropic trend, unfortunately, which, somebody like me, I don't know, I'm a Substack writer, and I do try and, I guess, sort of do something, against that, try to present something more positive and more, I guess. Lately, I've written more about that kind of spirituality, I guess, and I guess religion in a way, but kind of not conventional religion. Trying to present a picture of, the human being as something more than just this horrible vision of a servant to the machine intelligence, or a kind of bug on, the holy planet Earth, polluting, sort of vermin. These equally, I think, equally disgusting views of the sort of accelerationist right and the degrowth left.
Yeah, maybe the accelerationist left is the sweet spot.
If I may, I would just say, yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's worth asking what is going on in the current milieu that's leading people to be anti-human on all sides. I think that's a deep, interesting cultural and philosophical question. I'm not sure that it's always been this way. Obviously, there's always going to be misanthropes, and there's always going to be elitists and people who think that other people are trash, and so on and so forth. But for this to be the general sentiment of people on various ends of the spectrum, obviously most people aren't really that political either way, but for those to be the representative polls of the discourse is I think points to something very wrong. Something's definitely gone wrong.
Yeah, luckily, if you actually just kind of go out and interact people, just doing the most mundane things, just standing in line at the bank or going to the gas station or something like that, people are not hell bent on just seeing negativity or amplifying it somehow. They're quite kind to each other still. I luckily I don't live in the Bay Area and run errands out there anymore. It's kind of depressing, but yeah. So I obviously this is a major cliche, but they say Twitter is not real life. I actually think for some of us it's real enough. For people who are sort of VIPs, it is real life. But this general notion about the negativity of humanity, you'll get a really skewed view of that if you're just not going out to do even the most trivial of errands.
Yeah, I think the problem is like the most influential people have this negative view, right? I mean, whether they are, Twitter denizens, who I think we are influential. Maybe not me personally, but people like Bronze Age pervert is a pretty influential guy.
Something like I interject real quick. Only about 15% of all X users have more than 1,000 followers. So, I mean, just put it in perspective, you might actually. Now, I don't know about the other side of the equation. If they're also following 11,000, it's probably not too difficult to get 1,000. But I don't know.
Well, there's I think when you look at Twitter and you look at the big accounts, I mean, they are pretty kind of negative about things generally. Yeah. You've got like Zero HP Lovecraft. And I don't think he's a totally bad account by any means, but he does write some interesting fiction. He's working on a novel, apparently, he said, which is remarkable in itself, I think, because nobody seems to be working on novels at the moment.
Alexander interviewed him.
Oh, right.
Yeah, some time ago.
But like men, I mean, generally, there's like it seems to be being taken over by women a bit. This art form, and but anyway, yeah, I think he's all right as a guy, but yeah, he does put out a lot of kind of anti-woman stuff, racist stuff as well. I understand how Americans might feel about race at the moment because they're kind of getting this 24/7 kind of propaganda about the non-white races being wonderful, especially black people and so on. So there's a kind of reaction against that. I'm more of a kind of 80s and 90s kind of person in that sense that I don't want to embrace racism or anything. I rather treat people equally, sort of as individuals, let's say, not to just assume based on what race they belong to. But I understand, yeah, that the left in America, the Democrat Party, is pushing this kind of, radical so-called anti-racism, which is really just a kind of anti-white racism. Yeah, it is another form of racism, and it's created this backlash, which is kind of unfortunate. And also, I think it's a reaction against all the affirmative action, isn't it? Which it's just gone too far. Really, it's not. You don't have a meritocratic system anymore. in operation. You just got this kind of affirmative action system, which I also I don't agree with. Yeah, I don't think there should be affirmative action.
Yeah, I think for a lot of very unglamorous jobs, and they can be unglamorous, but also not necessarily low paying. I think for a lot of jobs like that, merit mostly holds. But you're very you're in a kind of a prestige industry, and you're going to be public facing and all that. That's definitely a play. It's not fashionable to be any of us.
One of the go on. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that the real thing is just, are you in an industry where it's sustainable and where you have the kind of affordances to be non-meritocratic? That's part of why tech's become so woke. It's if you leave the technical part meritocratic, there's a lot you can do in the non-technical part with all of the money that you're making. And you could basically choose to be wasteful. You could choose to have bad hires. You could choose to promote people to positions that they're not competent for. You could choose to do terrible marketing, make huge mistakes like what Google just did recently with their crazy AI that was Gemini, that was like producing absurd images and making a public spectacle out of them. And eventually it does become unsustainable if the rot goes through your entire company, because you just end up totally dysfunctional. But you can absorb the cost for a very long time if you have high margins and you're making a lot of money.
Yeah, that's interesting. I thought about that. Is it their monopolistic position that allows, many of the, it's not like all the Fortune 500 is monopolistic, but when you get into the, I almost said G7. God, what is that term? I think they call them mags now, or there's a stock. Anyway, like the top handful of tech companies, I've wondered if they are engaging in this stuff. Yeah, because they can afford to be sort of wasteful. I don't know, but when I think about public schools and how many, how woke they are, and then I think about private schools, in fact, being even worse. I'm not so sure it stems from economics. It just may be a kind of a runaway cultural force or something.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the interesting things, to watch recently has been these kind of rival explanations for, these. I think it was a Boeing plane, wasn't it, where like the panel got ripped off in mid-flight, just kind of tore away from the body, and there was this gaping hole in the plane, which was then, of course, videoed. And there was like these two competing explanations. One was a black guy, basically, diversity, equity, inclusion was to blame because a black guy had fitted this panel, and the other one was much more complicated, kind of a leftist explanation that I think Boeing had was sort of neglected to invest enough capital in the actual sort of business, in the material side of the business, and it was rather using this capital to boost the share prices and get dividends for stocks.
Yeah, I mean they're probably the number one plane maker, right? And so maybe monopolistic position, or a lot of their contracting with government or something like that can all sort of get them to not take customer safety seriously enough.
Yeah.
A lot of different, yeah.
I think there's probably a bit of truth in both of these explanations. I think DEI is pretty corrosive. I mean, I think that's clear. But also, the leftists, especially some of these kind of Marxists who have not embraced woke, but rather try to stick to their sort of economic analysis and materialist analysis. I think they have a point. Yeah, the capitalism has become increasingly corrupt, especially in the United States, I think, and this is kind of having a terrible effect on all kinds of things. But yeah, I think that there's this kind of culture war tendency to latch on to one of these explanations, which in a way is kind of trying to defend your whole theoretical framework, isn't it? Sort of Marxists trying to say, well, everything's economics, really. And maybe right wingers saying everything is race,
Yeah.
There's
a kind of liberal centrist position that basically says something like this is always bound to happen, and there's more media now than ever, so we're not going to miss it, and that really it's not including anything in particular. There is no path.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there is something, there is a general feeling of a decline, right, throughout the West now. Especially since the pandemic, I think people have become more aware of it, of breakdowns, of things not working properly, whether they be public services or private companies. And I think that's real. I don't think that's a kind of subjective illusion or anything. I think that's real. But yeah, there's a difficulty of trying to get some kind of holistic discourse on this, right? There's just these competing culture war explanations, and I think neither of them really, grapples with the deeper causes. Like sort of this sort of Spenglerian, kind of depth of the problem. But you're not going to get that, right? Because it's so tribal on social media. The culture war is just absolute. It's absolutely Schmittian, isn't it? It's friend and enemy. If you're a friend if you've got the right explanation, right, for something. If you got the wrong explanation, then you're my enemy. So, I think the grand theory of the the Spenglerian type of grand holistic theory. That's probably a thing of the past now, right? Because it just doesn't fit into the culture war, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, postmodernism gave us this notion that the overarching narrative had collapsed. There was no such thing anymore, and theories are still going around, but yeah, it has been kind of replaced by this shifting ad hoc, tribal, half ideological and half theoretical thing. Anyway, we've been on over an hour now. Not with you, Hagulian, but I've had Alexander on for over an hour now. So I think I'll wind it down. Do you want to add anything, Alex?
Oh, well, I guess I appreciate the invitation and I appreciate the discourse. As far as the last comment, yeah, I think you're correct. I think that especially social media, the internet environment, incentivizes you to take a clear and direct culture war explanation for everything that happens. You're incentivized to do that. If you want more followers, if you want more subscribers, if you want to be popular, basically, and you're going to talk about political topics or even anything that could be politicized as a topic, which is almost everything now, then you have a strong financial and personal incentive to move in that direction, and it can be hard to resist. The only thing I would say is that I think the univariate explanations are probably all overdetermined, and so the decline in competence, I think, is generally true, and it's difficult to measure. And I think that fundamentally it has to do, outside of the Spenglerian explanations for sort of the exhaustion of cultural energy. I think another large component of this that's just true, especially in the West right now, is just the decline in the social fabric, the decline of any sense of cohesion, or that we're all in this together, or that we're even moving towards the same goal, and that, and also a set of shared mores and set of understandings about right and wrong societies, your role within it. Whether you have any kind of obligation to your friends or neighbors or colleagues or anything like that. I think all of that combines together to sort of give us this morass that we find ourselves in. But it's been an interesting conversation. I'm not sure we got exactly anywhere where we were supposed to, but I think we've explored a lot of very odd tensions in our current moment.
Yeah. I guess I'm the one who's going to hold it down for classical liberalism here, and I will say that I think classical liberalism was blindsided by the way that the market and especially the market, because they were already fairly into diversity and all that, but I think they didn't realize just how much that would sort of eat into some of our core needs in a kind of Maslow's hierarchy kind of way. So it ends up encroaching on some of our most basic needs without substituting for them anything that will actually satisfy. Yeah, I didn't word that very well. Point is, it became corrosive to people in the most basic necessities in a way I think maybe classical liberalism took for granted would always be there. You know. So, yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Take care, Agulian. I know it's always late when we wrap these things up. It's even late when we start them.
All right. Yeah.
So, thanks for joining.
Thanks for inviting me back. So see you next time.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. Take care, you guys.
3, 2.